Ever since I left school, I've been immersed in the world of bars and pubs. What started as a temporary gig to earn some cash while I figured out my next move turned into a multi-year journey. Eventually, I landed a supervisor role at a local pub, where being a bartender is tough but far from dull. Busy shifts are the norm, filled with laughs and generous tips. Despite the weekend crowds, it never feels too overwhelming, especially when a favorite regular slips me a Jaeger shot on the sly. But there's one date on the calendar that every bartender dreads: March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. Where I live, St. Patty's means everyone, regardless of background, suddenly claims Irish heritage. From Kiss Me, I'm Irish shirts to fake ginger beads and four-leaf clover hats, the bar floor becomes a sea of green. And once the night kicks off, things get wild. The influx of actual Irish visitors who ferried over for a few days of celebration adds to the chaos. We open up at 10 in the morning to serve breakfast and lunch, and there's already a crowd of Irishmen outside, having knocked back a few pints at hotel bars before arriving. It's like a contest to see who can outdrink whom, with some foolishly attempting to best the Irish on their own turf. Needless to say, it leads to some pretty grim working conditions. There are moments when you lose count of how many times you've had to mop up vomit. Definitely not the most glamorous aspect of the job. You know, managing the crowds on Paddy's Day is tough, but usually manageable. What wasn't manageable for me was an encounter I had a few Paddy's Days ago, a visit to our pub from a man that's etched in my memory. One thing that stands out about the Paddy's Day crowd is how they all seem to be wearing the same thing. I mentioned before the tacky souvenir items people can get their hands on, but what really struck me was the overwhelming presence of branded merchandise, especially from companies like Guinness. They flood the streets with freebies. So imagine a sea of people sporting green Guinness t-shirts, silly leprechaun hats, fake ginger beards, and those downright creepy leprechaun masks. It's like everyone blends into one, making bartending a real challenge, not to mention trying to remember who ordered what. So there I am pulling pints when this guy in a leprechaun mask approaches the bar. I ask him what he wants, but his words are muffled by the mask. Now, I've had enough of asking people to remove their masks, so I may have been a bit curt when I asked him to take it off. He shakes his head, leans in closer, and orders a pint of Guinness in a distinctly English accent. Now, here's the thing about Guinness. When it comes to pouring a pint of Guinness, there's a bit of an art to it. You don't just fill the glass and plunk it down in front of the customer. No. You've got to pour about 2/3 of that thick black liquid into the glass and let it settle before topping it off with the rest. That way you end up with a perfectly balanced pint, as creamy as it is flavorful. So that's exactly what I do. I pour the drink, then let it settle, just like I've done countless times before. But on this particular occasion, the masked man at the bar wasn't too pleased about it. He started waving almost frantically, so I asked him what the problem was. Turns out, he thought I'd only poured him half a drink and demanded that I bring it to him immediately. I chuckled a bit, thinking he was joking, and launched into the usual spiel about the art of pouring Guinnesses. But then he accused me of mocking him, insisting I was looking for a fight. It was utter nonsense. At that point, I knew we couldn't have someone like him causing trouble in our pub. Giving alcohol to someone like that only makes matters worse. So I put on my best polite professional voice, addressing him as sir and all that, and gently explained why he needed to leave. But then, out of nowhere, he drops this bombshell: "I'm gonna effing kill you." I was taken aback, to say the least. I leaned back, utterly confused, asking him to repeat himself. He calmly reiterates his threat, saying he'll wait outside until closing time, then hunt me down and kill me. He even mentions going home to fetch a kitchen knife. Now, I've had my fair share of threats from rowdy customers, but they're usually all bark and no bite. This guy, though, was different. He was eerily calm, explaining his plan with chilling certainty. I admit I was seriously freaked out. I reached out to grab his mask, desperate to see the face behind the threat, but he dodged my hand and sauntered off into the crowd, disappearing before I could do anything else. After the masked man vanished, I spent the next 15 minutes scouring the horseshoe-shaped bar, trying to spot him. But he was nowhere to be found. Sure, he could have been tucked away in some corner, griping to his buddies about the bartender being a jerk or whatever, but part of me couldn't shake the feeling that he'd actually gone home to grab a weapon, taking advantage of the chaotic St. Paddy's Day festivities. By the end of my shift, I was emotionally drained. Every time I glimpsed one of those ridiculous leprechaun masks, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of paranoia. Each one could have been that guy returning to finish what he'd threatened. I know it sounds absurd in hindsight, but in the moment the fear was very real. You see, every murder story starts out seeming improbable until it's splashed across the front pages, with people coming forward to say they never saw it coming. And honestly, a part of me feared that my face would be plastered all over those newspapers the next day. But in moments like those, I find myself grateful to the man upstairs for keeping me safe. It might sound cliché, but that night I truly felt like someone was watching over me.
It's March 17th, 2019, St. Patrick's Day in Cooktown County, Tyrone, United Kingdom. 17-year-old Lauren Bullock is gearing up for a party, eagerly anticipating the night ahead. Throughout the school day, she and her friends were abuzz with excitement, swapping outfit ideas and rumors about who would be there. But most importantly, they were plotting how to secure the essential St. Patrick's Day staple: booze. No St. Paddy's Day bash is complete without a generous supply of alcohol, as any true Irishman will attest. And for underage Lauren, acquiring it was as simple as a bit of extra makeup and some strategic tiptoeing at the store counter. Without their school uniforms, they blended in seamlessly with the adults. After wrapping up classes, Lauren and her crew gathered at a parent's house to primp and prep for the festivities. Outfits were scrutinized, makeup meticulously applied, and a sampling of their alcohol stash helped them achieve the perfect pre-party buzz. When the time came, they piled into a taxi bound for Greenvale Hotel, a few miles down the road. But upon arrival, chaos awaited them. The hotel, situated on the outskirts of Cookstown, had opted for a St. Patrick's Day dry disco for the local youth. It was a scene of mayhem, as underage drinking remains a pervasive issue in the UK, particularly in Northern Ireland, where it's deeply ingrained in tradition. For parents, knowing their children's whereabouts on such a rowdy night provided some solace, even if they recognized the inevitability of underage drinking. As Lauren and her friends arrived at the Greenvale venue, it was clear that alcohol was the main attraction. Despite the venue's maximum capacity of just 100, a crowd of 500 to 600 enthusiastic Irish youth had gathered outside, eagerly awaiting entry. While such a chaotic scene might deter others, Lauren and her crew found it thrilling. In rural Ireland, where opportunities for excitement are scarce, the prospect of mingling with peers outside of school hours is irresistible for teenagers. Stepping out of the taxi into the brisk evening air, Lauren and her friends embraced the lively atmosphere, eager to catch up with old friends and perhaps make a few new ones along the way. Inside the Greenvale Hotel, the management faced a dilemma. They knew they couldn't accommodate the massive crowd gathered outside, but turning away patrons on St. Patrick's Day would be a financial blow. The holiday was a boon for the hotel, revitalizing the community and local economy after the typically quiet months of January and February. To manage the situation, the general manager braved the crowd, explaining that the venue couldn't accommodate everyone. Disappointed but understanding, the youth were asked to form a queue for entry, where staff would collect entrance fees and stamp their hands for verification. As I mentioned earlier, it's a common tradition in the UK and beyond to pre-game before heading to a pub, club, or party, aiming to kickstart the night and save a bit of cash. The same held true for the underage gathering at Greenvale that night. Instead of forming an orderly queue as instructed, chaos quickly ensued. What began as a relatively calm scene spiraled into a frenzy of pushing, shouting, and fighting. Hotel staff pleaded with the drunken crowd to calm down, but their words were drowned out by the cacophony of rowdy teenagers. Lauren found herself caught in the crush, pressed against the outer walls of the Green Veil. Despite her efforts to push back and create space, she felt increasingly trapped. Neither she nor her friends could move, their bodies squeezed tightly together. As the pressure mounted, some began to complain of feeling faint. Lauren struggled to breathe as the crowd closed in around her. In the midst of the chaos, she witnessed a young man collapse from lack of oxygen, his plight unnoticed by the throngs of revelers who trampled over him in their haste to get inside. With her last bit of strength, Lauren cried out for help, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Instead, she watched in despair as teenage boys pushed the crowd forward, eager to start drinking, dancing, and flirting. In that moment, amidst the chaos and callousness, Lauren realized the true danger of the situation. And as darkness closed in around her, she knew she had to fight to survive. In the moments before losing consciousness, the scene at Greenvale Hotel was nothing short of horrific. The crush lasted for nearly half an hour, and by the time the crowd realized the danger, it was too late. Lauren, along with several other teenagers, had suffocated in the chaos. Nigel Rudel, the medical director of Northern Ireland's ambulance service, described the scene as upsetting for the emergency crews who responded to the call. He emphasized that everything pointed towards a tragic accident, extending heartfelt sympathy to the families affected. However, the media seemed to frame the tragedy as something inevitable, akin to a terror attack or natural disaster. But the truth was far from natural. The deaths at Greenvale Hotel were entirely avoidable. Poor planning, drug use, and youthful recklessness had proven to be a deadly combination. It's imperative to acknowledge that incidents like this will continue to occur unless tangible changes are made. We cannot afford to overlook the preventable factors that led to such a devastating loss of life.
A few years back, on St. Patrick's Day, I found myself at a college bash, soaking in the festive spirit. I cruised over with a buddy to this epic shindig hosted by a fellow student who happened to own a sprawling mansion near campus. He was known for throwing legendary parties, especially during holidays. Entry fee? A cool $10 and donning green was the unspoken rule of the night. As the house swelled with partygoers of all stripes, I made sure to keep my wits about me. I had the responsibility of being the designated driver. After mingling for what felt like ages, I realized my friend was nowhere in sight. Brushing off any concern, I figured she was lost in the revelry somewhere. Finding myself solo in the kitchen, I spotted a peculiar figure across the room. This guy seemed to be on a mission, working the room and chatting up multiple girls. He gave off major, creepy older dude vibes, out of place amidst the youthful crowd. It baffled me how he managed to blend in, let alone charm his way into conversations with fellow students. His lines were cringe-worthy, and he seemed relentless in offering shots of vodka to anyone who'd listen. Though intrigued, I kept my distance. When his gaze locked onto mine, I quickly diverted my attention. He made his move, offering me a swig from a bottle of Grey Goose. Politely declining, I stuck to my resolve. I wasn't about to compromise my sobriety or safety, especially with the responsibility of getting myself and my friend home safely. I couldn't tell if he was just tipsy or flat out determined, but he kept pushing me to drink whatever concoction he had in hand. "Come on, how do you expect to snag a date if you keep pushing people away?" He slurred, his words a mix of disgust and offense. "Excuse me?" I shot back, repulsed by his persistence. "You heard me. Stop playing hard to get," he persisted, his tone shifting from annoying to downright aggressive. It was getting under my skin, and I felt the urge to let loose and shout, even if it meant making a spectacle of myself. But I held back, reining in my temper to avoid unnecessary drama. Besides, I knew the crowd would intervene if things got out of hand. In a firm, dry tone, I told him to wake up and smell the rejection. "I'm not interested, so back off," I spat, leaving my empty glass on the countertop in a deliberate gesture. But before I could make my exit, he grabbed my shoulder, insisting on giving me a ride home to save me some Uber money. His arrogance grated on me, his entitlement oozing from every word. But I wasn't about to be another conquest on his list. I rebuffed his offer once more and swiftly distanced myself from the creep. Moments later, my focus shifted to my friend, whom I spotted locking lips with a stranger in the crowd. To my dismay, it was none other than the creep. Concern flooded me as I realized she might have had one too many drinks, clouding her judgment. Determined to intervene, I fought my way through the throng, desperate to reach her. As I approached, I saw the creep leading my friend outside, his grip tight on her arm. Alarm bells rang in my head. I wasn't sure if he had tampered with her drink, but I knew I had to act fast. Closing the gap, I reached out for her arm, intending to pull her away. She screamed, and I struggled against the creep's renewed efforts to shove her into his car, the situation escalating by the second. Amidst the pounding bass and chaotic party scene, my screams were drowned out by the blaring music. The creep, startled by the commotion, decided to release my friend, vanishing into the night behind the wheel of his car. Meanwhile, I watched in horror as my friend's legs gave way beneath her, a sudden loss of balance sending her crashing to the ground. But the shock didn't end there. One by one, others began to collapse around us, bodies dropping like flies. Panic gripped me as I surveyed the scene, wondering just how much alcohol had been consumed. Hastily, I checked my friend's pulse, only to find it faint and her breaths shallow. With no time to spare, I dialed for an ambulance. As the emergency services arrived, stretcher after stretcher was filled with the unconscious victims, swiftly whisked away to the hospital. Hours dragged by, the anxious wait punctuated by the grim realization that something sinister had unfolded. It wasn't until later that it became clear. The drinks had been spiked. The image of the creep loomed large in my mind as the police launched their investigation. Despite efforts, his identity remained elusive, his crimes shrouded in mystery. Yet the pattern emerged, a pattern of preying on unsuspecting partygoers, luring them into danger. This tale echoes a real-life incident from Ireland, where a vigilant friend captured the moment a drink was spiked. Swift action saved her friend from harm, but the perpetrator remains at large. Sadly, it's a reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places.